Hey guys, so we're gonna look at the actual war now. We're not gonna really look at a lot of the battles and get too specific on the war. Uh, we're just kind of looking on just kind of the general what was the war like, and what we're really talking about is more of the Western Front, how that war kind of progressed because this is kind of the one that we're most into. We'll look at Russia in another lesson. Um, So I'm actually going to show you like a whole bunch of pictures and stuff on this PowerPoint. There's only a couple things if we were doing this in class I'd have you write down. But just kind of general feel like what was World War One like? This war when it happened was considered the war to end all wars. Like it was horrific, and people like, oh my gosh, like, well, how could we possibly do this again? Like World War One was so terrible. Surely we would have learned our lesson of like, oh my gosh, we shouldn't be doing this, which, as we all know, unfortunately wasn't the case. But it was terrible, worse than any war that had come before it. Mostly due to the fact that weapon technology had increased to a point where things were just horrifically deadly. But initially, when war broke out, people were super excited in Europe. There hadn't been a war in Europe in a long time, not really since the Napoleonic Wars. It had been like a full generation. You had a whole, uh, you know, group of youth that had never experienced war firsthand. All they had read in the history books were the glory and the honor, and everything was great. And, that was their turn. They're going to go off. And again, everyone was, nationalism. Everyone was convinced of their own superiority. Every country, the 20-year-olds were like, we're going to go in, we're going to kick butt. This war is going to be easy. We're gonna be heroes and come back, and everyone will love us. And yay, go us. Like we'll be the ones they write songs about in history books, and everything's going to be great. So there's this initial intense enthusiasm for the war, and everyone is totally assuming they're going to win. All right. Now uh, every country plans for war even during peace. Like, America right now, uh, we have, somewhere deep in the depths of the Pentagon, like our war plan for a war with China. And we have a war plan for a war with Russia. Like, hope we never have to use them, but like, we're strategizing like, hey, if we ever go to war, this is probably what they're going to do. This is probably what we should do. And so we have kind of like a plan of action. Well, Germany had the same thing. Right? Germany knew that Russia and France were allies. And they knew if they went to war with one, they'd go to war with both. And they knew that presented them a problem because Russia's on one side and France is on the other. So they had to fight this true front war, which you don't want to do as a country. You want to focus all of your forces in one front. So they came up with a plan called the von Schlieffen Plan to deal with this. All right, and so when war broke out, they executed that plan. And the plan was this: basically, France. They're both industrialized, but France was way ahead. Russia was still kind of getting their feet underneath them. It's a much larger country, lagging behind technologically. So the Germans are like, look, it's going to take Russia a lot longer to get ready for war. You have to organize it. You got to get all your food ready, and your clothes, and your supplies, and your guns, and you got people trained. Like, you can't just, declare war on Monday and then start fighting on Tuesday. Like, it takes a long time to get everyone ready. So it's going to take them a lot longer. So what we should do is we should try to knock out France first. And if we can do that, so everything at France, then we can turn around and take out Russia. And that way, we can they'll be very much slower, and we can take care of them later. And if we take out France, we conquer Belgium, we conquer France. The United Kingdom is at war with you, but where are they going to land? Like, if you take out France, they can't land there. The Netherlands is neutral; they're not going to let anyone land there. You conquer Belgium, they can't land there, and an attempt at landing in Germany itself is going to be suicidal. So that kind of knocks United Kingdom out of the war as well. At least they can't attack you, and they're kind of just sitting there on their island. Okay, so that's the plan. And the plan was to send an initial attack across here, the German-French border, which makes sense. Like, that's kind of where you would think to attack. But the real attack would actually go through Belgium, which was neutral at the time, and then try to take out Paris is about right here. So go through Belgium and try to take out Paris. And if you do that, you basically win the war. Okay, so here's the von Schlieffen plan, and it almost works. They attack first the Southern Army. The French take the bait. They go down. They try to stop this. The second attack goes through, and they get really close. Like they're super close. They're like, I think, like 15 miles away from Paris. Like they're really, really close to capturing the city and ending the war. But the French are able to rally. They realize what's going on. They get people back as fast as they can. They stabilize the front. They stop the German advance. And then after the initial start of the war, where things moved very, very fast for like a couple months, this is where everything bogs down. This is where both sides are not basically able to move. And then this is the birth of the trench warfare that really is going to define the Western Front in World War I. Okay? You got machine guns. You got artillery that fires way faster than ever before. The old-fashioned warfare that people had used basically forever. War had essentially always been, you guys line up, and then you attack each other. At first with sticks and spears and swords and whatever, and then eventually guns. But even up when we had guns, they were still standing in line shooting at each other. And then one side would usually charge with their bayonets. Well, now you got machine guns. You can't do that. You can't just stand out because it's not one person firing a shot every, 20 seconds if they're really, really skilled. Now it's a machine gun. And it's thousands of rounds a minute, and they're just mowing people down. So the defensive technology has progressed to a point where you can't really do anything. So both sides basically dig in. This is one of the slides I'd have you write down. And then you'd have your line of trenches here. You have your line of trenches here. And then every once in a while, one side would, as I say, go over the top where they just have this mass attack into the others. Usually unsuccessful because they would just mow them all down before they got there. Even if you were successful, you lost thousands and thousands and thousands of men to capture, 600 yards of territory. And then the enemy would just retreat to a trench behind it, and now it's just like, okay, here we go again. And then maybe they would counterattack back and push them back, and they attack back, and they would just kind of go back and forth over the same 2 miles of land for years, losing tens of thousands of people in the process. Okay, so life in the trenches. Trenches basically just started out of necessity. No commander planned for trench warfare. It was just simply troops not wanting to die, digging into the earth to try to get some sort of cover. And they started off as very small, rudimentary, and then they got much, much, much more sophisticated as people realized this is what it is now in World War I. Okay. Life in the trench would be pretty rough. This was a nice trench. It had wooden flooring, which is always preferable. If not, you just have the mud, which was terrible because moisture always flows down. You would get down in there. You'd be standing in water, which means your socks would get wet. Well, which means by your feet, your feet are 98.6 degrees. That's a nice warm environment. It's a wet environment, and bacteria loves that. So life in the trenches was a breeding ground of bacteria, and trench foot, if you remember that from 7th grade, was a very common occurrence where basically flesh-eating bacteria would get, and they would start munching up your foot, and if it got bad, their only cure was to amputate it. Okay, so pretty nasty. Rats, lice, disease. The coronavirus we're in right now. The epidemic. We haven't seen anything like this since World War I, since the Spanish flu. If you guys have probably heard, news talking about that. Well, one of the ways that the Spanish flu was spread was through the trenches of World War I, because everyone was in close contact, and then the soldiers went home and brought it back with them, and then it spread throughout the world. So some pictures of life in trenches, the combat. Here's the machine guns. If you try to charge into this, it's essentially suicidal. And the battles are horrific. The commanders didn't adapt. This was a 20th century war fought with 19th century tactics, where the old kind of, we're just going to walk at the enemy and get slaughtered. um, was just this the par for the course. And it was just kind of just throw more bodies, throw more bodies, throw more bodies, because they didn't really have another way of breaking this stalemate that had happened. So this is a famous poem. We're actually going to look at this a little bit later next week as well, um, by Wilfred Owen. It's called Dulce et Decorum Est, and essentially tells the story of a gas attack. So there's a bunch of soldiers. They're exhausted from the war and they're beat down, and then a gas attack happens. Okay, so poison gas, chemical warfare was used first time in World War One on a large scale, at least. Um, and they're trying to get their gas masks on, but someone doesn't get it on. So someone was still yelling out and stumbling and fluttering like a man in fire alarm. So someone doesn't get their mask on in time, and they inhale it. And basically, this is written by an actual soldier, Wilfred Owen. So assuming based on basically a real event that he witnessed firsthand, as they're kind of just watching helplessly as this guy dies. Because once you got a big breath, essentially there's different types of poison gas. This was green, so it'd be chlorine gas. Essentially, what it does is when it mixes with the moisture in your lungs, turns to acid. So it basically dissolves you from the inside. So if someone takes a big breath of it and they get it, there's nothing you can do. Their lungs basically are dissolving. They can't breathe, and you just sit there and watch as this person dies. There's nothing you can do. You can't stop the bleeding. You can't they're dead. Like it's just they haven't died yet, but it's a matter of time. So he watches this guy die in front of him, and this horrific, traumatizing. In fact, it says, "In all my dreams before my helpless sight." So basically, he's traumatized. He has dreams of this happening over and over again. He sees his friend, you can assume, dying in front of him. So he says, "If you could see this, if you could see it, if you could hear all that kind of stuff, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest, children ardent for some desperate glory, the old lie, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori." This is Latin. If you speak Spanish, some of these words might sound kind of familiar because Spanish is derived from Latin. This is a phrase that you're not familiar with, but if you were alive in Europe at this time, you might be. Essentially, it means it is sweet and honorable to die for your country. Okay, so this would like people say like, oh yeah, this would be like you're bouncing your son like little Timmy on your knee, like, hey, dulce et decorum est, like one day you're gonna be a soldier and you sacrifice your life for your country, and it's a sweet, honorable, great thing for you to do this. And at the beginning of the war, people are like, yeah, we're gonna be heroes, and if I die, oh well, I'm serving my country and kind of stuff. And Wilfred Owen, experiencing the war, and as you can see, unfortunately, does pass away right before the war is over. Like he almost makes it, but dies right at the end. He's like, nah. Like, if you saw the reality of war, you wouldn't be telling it. Like, this is terrible. You would never want your children anywhere near this. Like, this is a lie. Like, it's not. This is just, it sucks, and it's painful, and it's dirty, and it's disgusting. And this isn't honorable at all. And this is considered one of the great anti-war, poems, certainly, but works of art, period, of all time. So it was really, really terrible, the war. And it's mostly because of the new weapons. You got machine guns, even things like barbed wire, which wasn't new, but and very, very simple compared to all the feats of technology, but super effective. You put barbed wire in front of your trenches, and people can't just run through it. Like it and then they're getting caught up in the barbed wire, and they're easy targets for your machine guns and stuff. Flamethrowers, the big guns of World War One, getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So this is the infamous Paris gun, which is the largest gun, I think, ever, certainly of World War One. It's almost comically big. So here's a person here, and this is the gun itself. So basically, this was designed by the Germans to why it's called a Paris gun, to be able to bombard the actual city of Paris from the German lines. So it could fire a shell so far it could reach the city of Paris. And it was super inaccurate, but they're aiming for a city, so they're going to hit something in Paris. basically a terror weapon, not really militarily practical. And we have airplanes at this time. So basically, when the French are being shelled, like what the crap was going on, they realize there's got to be a big gun out there. They send out their planes, they find it, they destroy it. So not only practical, but it was built, and this is the Paris gun. So all these new weapons of war, but not new tactics to, have your men not die horribly to these new weapons of war. So you got tanks and airplanes, and yeah. So World War One people started off, and this seemed the greatest thing ever, but it actually ended up. Well, I mean, it was always going to be terrible, but people quickly realized, oh my gosh, war is awful, and this war especially, and some people were dying, and it was really, really nasty. So that's kind of the characterization of World War One, and now we're going to look at how the United States became involved in the war and how it eventually ended.